A woman who crossed an ocean to claim a worthless ranch. A cowboy, one storm away from losing everything, and a contract designed to destroy them both. When Ethan Cole grabbed the stranger's wrist on that crowded platform, he had no idea she carried secrets powerful enough to shake an empire. She was supposed to fail. The land was supposed to break her. But Leon Jo didn't come to the frontier to beg for mercy. She came to fight. And when the trap finally closed around them, he had to make an impossible choice: walk away with a fortune, or stand beside a woman the world wanted gone. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin. The late afternoon sun beat down on Prescott Station like a punishment. Dust rose in thin spirals from the platform where a dozen passengers shuffled toward the exit, their faces weathered and blank with the exhaustion of long travel. The train hissed behind them, releasing steam in short, impatient bursts. Ethan Cole stood near the station house, one boot propped against the wooden wall, his hat pulled low against the glare. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was simply standing there because he had nowhere better to be. His shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat. His hands were calloused, his knuckles split from work that never seemed to end. 3 years of drought had turned his ranch into a graveyard of dry grass and cracked earth. The cattle were gone. The well was failing, and the bank had sent him a letter 2 weeks ago that he still hadn't opened. He watched the crowd thin: families, merchants, a few drifters who looked as hollowed out as he felt. And then he saw her. She moved through the platform like water through stone, smooth, deliberate, untouched by the chaos around her. Her dress was simple but well-made, deep blue fabric that hadn't yet surrendered to the dust. She carried a single leather case, small enough to hold in one hand. Her hair was pulled back in a tight braid that fell past her shoulders, black and sleek as polished wood. But it wasn't the dress or the case that stopped him. It was the way she moved. No hesitation, no glancing around for help, no nervous scan of unfamiliar faces. She walked like she knew exactly where she was going, in a town where no one like her had ever set foot. Ethan straightened without thinking. A Chinese woman, alone, in Prescott, Wyoming. He'd seen plenty of people pass through this station: settlers chasing land, prospectors chasing gold, women chasing husbands they'd only met through letters. But this woman wasn't chasing anything. She was walking with the kind of certainty that came from having already decided. She passed within 10 feet of him, her gaze fixed ahead. Her expression was calm, unreadable. Not cold, just controlled. Like she'd learned a long time ago that showing emotion was a risk she couldn't afford. Ethan told himself to let her go. It wasn't his business. He had enough trouble without adding more. But something in him refused to turn away. Maybe it was the way the men on the platform watched her. Not with curiosity, with calculation. The kind of look that measured weakness and opportunity in the same glance. Maybe it was the way she ignored them. Not out of fear, but out of dismissal. Like they weren't worth the effort of acknowledgement. Or maybe it was something deeper. Something he couldn't name but felt in his chest like a wound reopening. She reached the edge of the platform, her boots clicking softly against the wood. Ethan moved. "Ma'am?" She stopped. For a moment she didn't turn, just stood there perfectly still, as if deciding whether he was worth the interruption. Then she looked back. Her eyes met his, dark, sharp, and unflinching. There was no softness in them, no invitation, just a clear, quiet assessment of who he was and what he wanted. Ethan felt the words catch in his throat. "You got someone meeting you here?" Her gaze didn't waver. "No." "You know where you're going?" "Yes." Her voice was steady, accented but precise, each word carefully chosen, carefully delivered. Ethan hesitated. "This town's not easy on strangers." "I didn't come here for easy." The corner of her mouth didn't move, but something in her eyes shifted. Not amusement, not warmth, just the faintest acknowledgement that she'd heard worse warnings than his. She turned and kept walking. Ethan watched her disappear into the crowd, her blue dress a shrinking dot of color against the brown haze of dust and sun-baked wood. He told himself that was the end of it, but he was wrong. 3 days later, Ethan was at the land office when he heard the name for the first time. Leon Jo. The clerk said it like he was reading off a grocery list. Flat. Unremarkable. Ethan looked up from the water rights map he'd been pretending to study. Who? The woman who bought the Mercer place. Ethan blinked. The Mercer place? The clerk nodded, flipping through a stack of papers. Paid in full. Cash. That land's been dead for 5 years. I'm aware. No water, no grass. The house is half collapsed. I'm aware of that too. Ethan leaned against the counter. And she bought it anyway? The clerk shrugged. People make mistakes. Ethan stared at the map in front of him, his mind churning. The Mercer Ranch sat at the edge of the valley, wedged between two ridges that trapped heat and blocked rain. The original owner had gone bankrupt trying to keep it alive. His widow had sold it to a speculator who'd never even seen it. And now a woman who didn't know the first thing about ranching had just walked into a trap. She say why? Ethan asked. Didn't ask. You didn't think to warn her? The clerk gave him a dry look. I'm paid to process papers, not give advice. Ethan pushed off the counter and walked out into the street. The sun was already high, turning the dirt roads into ribbons of blinding white light. He squinted against the glare, his thoughts circling back to the woman on the platform, Lianzhou. The name felt foreign in his mouth, sharp, unfamiliar. But the image of her walking through that crowd, calm, focused, untouchable, stayed with him. She'd come here for a reason, that much was clear. What he couldn't figure out was why someone would pay cash for a dead ranch in the middle of nowhere, unless she didn't know it was dead. Or worse, unless she did. Ethan didn't plan to ride out to the Mercer place. He had his own problems, his own land slowly dying beneath him, his own creditors circling like vultures. But 2 weeks after hearing her name, he found himself saddling his horse at dawn and heading east toward the ridge. The ride took most of the morning. The land stretched out around him in waves of brown and gold, broken only by the occasional stand of cottonwood trees clinging to dry creek beds. The sky was wide and empty, the kind of blue that felt like it went on forever. When he crested the final ridge, he saw the ranch below. It looked worse than he remembered. The house sagged to one side, its porch caved in at the center. The barn had lost half its roof. The fences were little more than rotted posts leaning at drunken angles. And the land itself was a patchwork of cracked earth and dead brush, stretching out in every direction like a scar. No smoke from the chimney, no movement in the yard. Ethan slowed his horse, scanning the property. Then he saw her. She was standing in the middle of the eastern field, about 100 yards from the house. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hair tied back. She held a long wooden stake in one hand and a mallet in the other. She drove the stake into the ground with sharp, deliberate strikes. Measured. Controlled. Ethan guided his horse down the slope and across the field. The dry grass crunched beneath the hooves. She didn't look up until he was 20 feet away. When she did, her expression didn't change. No surprise. No alarm. Just that same calm, unreadable assessment. Mr. Cole. Ethan pulled his horse to a stop. You remember me. You're not easy to forget. He didn't know if that was a compliment or an insult. He dismounted, looping the reins over a fence post that looked like it might collapse if he breathed on it too hard. You're a long way from town, she said. So are you. She turned back to the stake, adjusting its angle before driving it deeper into the ground. I live here. This land's dead. I've noticed. Then why'd you buy it? She paused, resting the mallet against her shoulder. Her gaze swept across the field, taking in the cracked earth and brittle grass. Because no one else wanted it. Ethan frowned. That's not a reason. That's a fact. It's both. She moved to the next spot, measuring the distance with her eyes before marking the ground with the tip of the stake. Ethan watched her work. Her movements were efficient, practiced. Like she'd done this before, or at least studied it enough to know what she was doing. What are you building? He asked. Irrigation. He almost laughed. You can't irrigate dust. Not yet. You planning to pull water out of thin air? No. She drove the stake into the ground. I'm planning to pull it from the ridge. Ethan followed her gaze to the eastern slope, where a thin line of green clung to the rock face. A seep, barely enough to keep the scrub alive. That's not enough water to feed a field. It is if you move it correctly. He shook his head. You're wasting your time. That's my time to waste. She didn't say it with anger, just certainty. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Not sympathy, not pity, something closer to recognition. She wasn't naive, she wasn't foolish, she was stubborn, and stubbornness was the only thing that kept people alive out here. "You ever run a ranch before?" he asked. "No." "You know anything about cattle, crops, water management?" "Not yet." "Then you're going to fail." She looked at him then, really looked at him. Her eyes were dark and steady, and there was no fear in them, just a quiet, unshakable resolve. "Maybe," she said, "but I'm not leaving." Ethan held her gaze for a long moment. Then he sighed and pulled off his hat, wiping the sweat from his brow. "You're going to need help." "I didn't ask for any." "I know." He set the hat back on his head. "But you're going to need it anyway." She studied him, her expression impossible to read. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why what? Why do you care?" It was a fair question, one he didn't have a good answer for. He looked out across the dead field, the broken fences, the house that was barely standing. "Because I know what it's like to fight a losing battle," he said quietly, "and I know what it's like to do it alone." For the first time since he'd met her, something in her expression softened. Not much, just a fraction, like a door opening just wide enough to let in a sliver of light. "I can't pay you," she said. "I didn't ask for payment." "Then what do you want?" Ethan looked at her. At the way she stood in the middle of that broken field like it was something worth saving, at the way she held that mallet like it was a weapon she knew how to use. "I want to see if you're right," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "About what?" "About this land. About whether it's worth fighting for." She was quiet for a moment, then she nodded. "All right," she said. "Then let's find out." They worked through the afternoon, driving stakes into the ground and mapping the flow of water from the ridge to the field. Ethan showed her how to read the slope, how to find the natural channels where water would want to run. She showed him her plans, sketches drawn in a notebook with clean, precise lines. She'd studied this. Not just guessed. Studied it. "Where'd you learn this?" he asked, nodding at the notebook. "Books, engineers, people who knew more than I did." "You do this back east?" "In a way." She didn't elaborate, and Ethan didn't push. They worked in silence after that, the only sounds the strike of the mallet and the rustle of dry grass in the wind. By the time the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they'd marked out the entire system, a network of channels that would catch the seep water and guide it down into the field. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but it was a plan. Ethan straightened, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness. "You know this is going to take months, right? Maybe longer." "I know. And even if it works, you're still going to need seed, equipment, livestock." "I know that too. And the town's not going to make it easy on you." She looked at him, her expression calm. "Do you always assume the worst?" "Out here?" He glanced around the broken ranch. "Yeah, I do." She picked up her notebook, brushing the dust from the cover. "Then maybe you should try assuming something different." Ethan watched her walk back toward the house, her blue dress faded now with dust and sweat, her braids swinging gently with each step. He didn't know if she was brave or foolish, but he knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to quit. And for the first time in 3 years, Ethan Cole felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Over the next few weeks, Ethan found himself riding out to the Mercer place more often than he intended. At first, he told himself it was just to check on her progress, to make sure she wasn't doing anything dangerously stupid, but the truth was harder to ignore. She was good at this. Not in the way he was good at it, through years of hard experience and bruised knuckles. She was good at it the way an engineer was good at building a bridge. She saw the land not as a fight to be won, but as a problem to be solved. And slowly, impossibly, the land began to respond. The channels they'd dug caught the seep water and carried it down into the field. Not much at first, just a trickle, but enough to dampen the earth, enough to coax a few stubborn shoots of green from the soil. Leanne worked from dawn until dusk, her hands blistered and raw. She didn't complain, didn't ask for sympathy, just kept moving, kept building. Ethan helped when he could, though his own ranch still demanded most of his time. He brought tools she didn't have, showed her how to reinforce the channels so they wouldn't collapse in the next storm, taught her how to read the weather, how to smell rain on the wind even when the sky was clear. She listened, learned, adapted, and in the quiet moments between work, they talked. Not about the past, not at first, but about the land, about what it took to survive out here, about the strange, brutal beauty of a place that could kill you as easily as it could save you. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked one afternoon. They were sitting on the porch, or what was left of it, sharing a canteen of water. The sun was low, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Ethan took a long drink before answering. "Every day." "But you don't." "No." "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the light shift across the ridge. "Because leaving would mean admitting I was wrong," he said finally. "And I'm not ready to do that yet." She nodded slowly, like she understood. "What about you?" he asked. "Why here? Why this ranch?" She looked out across the field where the first green shoots were beginning to spread. "Because it reminded me of something I lost," she said quietly. "What was that?" She didn't answer right away, just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze distant. "Control," she said finally. Ethan frowned. "Over what?" "Everything." There was something in her voice, something raw and unguarded, that made him want to ask more. But before he could, she stood and brushed the dust from her skirt. "It's getting late," she said. "You should go." Ethan rose to his feet, recognizing the wall she'd just put up. He didn't push. Not yet. But as he rode back toward his own ranch, her words stayed with him. Control. He didn't know what she'd lost, but he knew what it felt like to lose it. The town didn't take kindly to Leon Joe. Ethan saw it the first time he rode into Prescott with her. She'd needed supplies, seed, lumber, nails, and he'd offered to show her where to get them. The moment they walked into the general store, the room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people minding their own business, the cold, watchful quiet of people deciding whether you belonged. The shopkeeper, a thick-necked man named Harlan, looked up from the counter, his eyes narrowing. "Help you?" he asked Ethan, ignoring Lion completely. "She needs supplies," Ethan said, nodding toward her. Harlan's gaze flicked to Leon, then back to Ethan. "That right?" Leon stepped forward, her voice calm. "I have a list." She set a folded piece of paper on the counter. Harlan didn't touch it, just stared at her like she'd set down something rotten. "We don't usually take orders from—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Outsiders." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "She's got cash. That make her enough of an insider for you." Harlan's eyes shifted to him, cold and measuring. "That's your business, Cole?" "It is if you're wasting her time." For a moment the air in the room felt thick enough to choke on. Then Harlan picked up the list, scanned it, and tossed it back on the counter. "Don't have half this stuff," he said flatly. Leon didn't blink. "Then I'll take what you do have." Harlan shrugged and started pulling items from the shelves, slowly, deliberately, like he was doing her a favor she didn't deserve. Ethan watched him work, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Leon didn't react, didn't flinch, just waited, her expression as calm and unreadable as ever. When Harlan finally finished, he dropped the items on the counter without bothering to wrap them. "That'll be $18. Leon counted out the money and set it on the counter without a word. Harlan took it, still not looking at her. Ethan helped her carry the supplies out to the wagon, his blood still simmering. "You shouldn't have to deal with that," he said once they were outside. Leon loaded a sack of seed into the wagon bed. "I've dealt with worse." "That doesn't make it right." She turned to him, her gaze steady. "No, but getting angry won't change it." "So you just take it?" "I survive it." She climbed onto the wagon seat. "There's a difference." Ethan stood there, watching her gather the reins. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. She looked down at him, and for a moment something in her expression softened. "I know," she said. Then she snapped the reins and the wagon rolled forward. Ethan watched her go, the weight of her words settling in his chest. She knew she didn't have to be alone, but she didn't know how to be anything else. The work continued. Slowly, painfully, the ranch began to change. The irrigation system spread across the eastern field, turning dust into damp earth. The green shoots thickened into grass. The fence posts were replaced. The barn roof was patched. It wasn't much. Not yet. But it was something. And for Leon, something was enough. Ethan found himself spending more time at the Mercer place than his own. He told himself it was because she needed the help, because the work was too much for one person. But the truth was simpler. He didn't want to leave. There was something about the way she moved through the world, steady, focused, unshakable, that made him feel less alone, less like he was drowning. And in the quiet moments between work, he began to see past the walls she kept around herself. She was brilliant, not just smart, brilliant. She saw patterns in the land that he'd never noticed, connections between water flow and soil composition, between wind direction and crop yield. She was also lonely. He saw it in the way she worked, in the way she pushed herself past exhaustion, like stopping would mean facing something she wasn't ready to face. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he asked her the question he'd been holding back for weeks. "Why'd you really come here, Leanne?" She didn't answer right away, just sat there, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. "I told you," she said finally. "I came to rebuild." "Rebuild what?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, so softly he almost didn't hear it, she said, "Everything." Ethan waited, and slowly, piece by piece, she told him. About her family, about the business her father had built from nothing, about the empire that stretched across 2 continents, held together by contracts and trade routes and carefully negotiated deals, about the man who'd tried to take it all. A financier from the East, powerful, connected, ruthless. He'd offered her father a partnership, a contract that promised expansion, security, profit. But it was a trap. Buried in the fine print was a clause that would transfer control of the entire business if a single condition wasn't met. Her father hadn't seen it, hadn't understood the danger until it was too late. And when he'd tried to fight back, the financier had crushed him. Not with violence, with law. With paperwork and courtrooms and judges who'd already been bought. Within a year, her father had lost everything. Within 2, he was dead. Leanne's voice didn't waver as she told the story, but Ethan saw the way her hands tightened around the cup, saw the tension in her shoulders. "The ranch," she said quietly. "It was part of the contract. A piece of land my father bought years ago, thinking it might be useful someday. He never came here, never even saw it. But when the financier took over, he kept it. Not because it was valuable, because it was worthless, a reminder of what he'd taken." She looked out across the field, where the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I came here to take it back," she said, "to prove that what he called worthless wasn't." Ethan stared at her, his chest tight. "You bought this land to prove a point?" "No." She turned to him, her eyes dark and fierce. "I bought it to survive, because if I let him win, I'd have nothing left." Ethan didn't know what to say, so he just sat there beside her as the night settled in around them. And for the first time since they'd met, he understood. She wasn't fighting the land, she was fighting for her life. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of hooves. He stepped out onto his porch and saw a rider approaching. A young man in a dusty coat, his face flushed with heat. "Message for you, Mr. Cole," the rider said, handing him a folded letter. Ethan took it, frowning. "From who?" "Didn't say. Just told me to make sure you got it." The rider tipped his hat and rode off. Ethan unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the neat, precise handwriting. It was short, just 3 lines. "Mr. Cole, I know what you're doing, and I know why. Walk away now, and I'll make it worth your time." There was no signature, just a number at the bottom. $5,000. Ethan stared at the letter, his hands shaking. $5,000. Enough to save his ranch, enough to pay off the bank, enough to start over. All he had to do was walk away, leave Leanne to fight her battle alone. He crumpled the letter in his fist and looked out toward the ridge, where the Mercer place sat in the distance. For a long moment he stood there, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a stone. Then he walked back inside, threw the letter into the stove, and watched it burn. When he rode out to the Mercer place that afternoon, Leanne was in the field, her sleeves rolled up, her hands deep in the earth. She looked up as he approached, wiping the dirt from her palms. "You're early," she said. "We need to talk." Something in his voice made her straighten. "What happened?" He dismounted and pulled the ashes of the letter from his pocket, holding them out to her. Someone offered me money to leave. Her expression didn't change, but he saw the flicker of something in her eyes. Not surprise, confirmation. How much? She asked quietly. Enough. She looked at the ashes, then back at him. And you're here because I'm not leaving. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then slowly, she nodded. All right, she said, and for the first time since he'd met her, Leah and Joe smiled. It wasn't much, just a small, fleeting curve of her lips. But it was enough. That smile stayed with Ethan longer than it should have. He thought about it as he rode back to his own ranch that evening, the sun bleeding red across the horizon. He thought about it as he fed his remaining horses, their ribs showing through dull coats. And he thought about it later that night, lying in his bunk, staring at the ceiling boards that needed replacing. It had been such a small thing, a momentary softening of her features, a brief crack in the armor she wore so carefully, but it had felt like a victory. The next morning he woke before dawn and rode straight back to the Mercer place. There was work to do, and now there was something else too. A quiet understanding that they were no longer just two people trying to survive alone. They were in this together, whether either of them had planned it or not. When he arrived, Leon was already awake, standing at the edge of the newly dug irrigation channel. She held a surveyor's level in her hands, checking the grade with the kind of precision that would have made a railroad engineer jealous. You're consistent, I'll give you that, Ethan said, dismounting. She didn't look up. Consistency is how things get built. Out here, consistency is how you go crazy. Then I suppose I'm halfway there already. This time, there was the faintest trace of humor in her voice. Ethan found himself grinning despite the early hour and the ache in his shoulders from yesterday's work. They spent the morning extending the channel system, digging new trenches that would carry water to the western portion of the field. The earth was stubborn, packed hard by years of drought and neglect. Every shovelful felt like a small battle won. Leanne worked beside him without complaint, her movements efficient and deliberate. She'd learned quickly how to read the land, how to spot the natural contours that would guide water where it needed to go. What she lacked in raw strength, she made up for in strategy. Around midday, they stopped to rest in the shade of the barn. Ethan passed her the canteen, and she drank deeply before handing it back. The offer they made you, she said, breaking the silence. It won't be the last. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead. I figured. They'll come at you differently next time, harder. Let them. She studied him with those dark, measuring eyes. You say that now, but $5,000 is a lot of money for a man who's losing his ranch. I'm not losing it yet. But you will be. Soon. The bluntness of her words should have stung. Instead, Ethan found them oddly refreshing. No false comfort, no empty reassurances. Just truth. Maybe, he admitted, but walking away from you won't change that. It'll just make me a coward and broke. Leon's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. A recognition, perhaps. Or respect. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. Helping me. Staying when you could take the money and at least save something. Ethan looked out across the field, where small patches of green were beginning to spread through the brown. You remember what you said yesterday about coming here to prove something wasn't worthless? She nodded. Well, maybe I'm doing the same thing, just with myself instead of land. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, brushing the dust from her work dress. Then we'd better make sure we both succeed, she said. They went back to work. As the weeks passed, word spread through Prescott about the Chinese woman and the failing rancher working the dead Mercer place. Most people thought they were fools. Some thought they were worse than fools. Some thought they were worse than that. Ethan started noticing the looks when he rode into town, the way conversations would stop when he entered the saloon, the cold shoulders from men he'd known for years. They saw him as a traitor to something, though what exactly he couldn't say. Maybe just to the unspoken rule that outsiders stayed outside, and people like Leon Joe weren't supposed to make something of themselves on land that white men had already declared worthless. He didn't care. Or at least he told himself he didn't. But one afternoon, when he was loading supplies onto his wagon, a rancher named Vernon Sykes stepped into his path. Vernon was a big man, thick through the shoulders and gut, with a face that had been weathered into permanent suspicion. He owned the largest spread in the valley, and he carried himself like a man who expected deference. "Heard you're spending a lot of time out at the Mercer place," Vernon said, his voice loud enough to carry across the street. Ethan kept loading. News travels fast. "It does when it's strange news." Vernon shifted his weight, blocking more of Ethan's path. "What's your business out there, Cole? Helping a neighbor? That woman's not your neighbor. She's not anybody's neighbor." Ethan straightened slowly, meeting Vernon's eyes. "She owns land in this valley. That makes her a neighbor. She owns a piece of dirt that should have stayed empty, and you helping her makes people wonder whose side you're on." "I didn't realize there were sides." Vernon's jaw tightened. "There's always sides, and you're picking the wrong one." For a moment, Ethan considered walking away, avoiding the confrontation. He'd never been a man who looked for fights. But something in Vernon's voice, that casual assumption that he had the right to decide who belonged and who didn't, made Ethan's blood heat. "Tell me something, Vernon," Ethan said quietly. "When you look at that woman, what scares you more? That she's different, or that she might actually succeed?" Vernon's face flushed dark red. "You watch your mouth, Cole. I'm just asking a question. You're stepping out of line is what you're doing. Maybe your line's in the wrong place." Vernon took a step forward, his hands curling into fists. For a second, Ethan thought the man might actually swing. Then a voice cut through the tension. "Problem here, gentlemen." They both turned to see Sheriff Dawes standing a few feet away, his thumbs hooked casually in his belt. Dawes was an older man, lean and weathered, with eyes that missed nothing. Vernon forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No problem, Sheriff. Just having a conversation." Looked like more than conversation from where I was standing. Well, it wasn't. Vernon shot Ethan one last hard look, then turned and walked away. Dawes waited until he was out of earshot before speaking again. "You're making enemies, Cole." "I'm just trying to help someone." "I know, and that's what's making enemies." Dawes sighed, pulling a toothpick from his pocket and sticking it in the corner of his mouth. "Word of advice? People around here don't like change. And that woman represents a lot of change all at once. She's just trying to work a ranch. No, she's trying to prove something, and proving things makes people uncomfortable." Dawes studied him for a moment. "You sure you want to be caught in the middle of whatever's coming?" Ethan thought about the smile Leon had given him, about the way she stood in that field like she was staking a claim on her own life. "Yeah," he said, "I'm sure." Dawes nodded slowly. "All right then. Just keep your head down and your eyes open. Things have a way of getting uglier before they get better." The sheriff walked away, leaving Ethan alone with his wagon and his thoughts. When Ethan returned to the Mercer place that evening, he found Leon standing at the fence line, staring out toward the ridge. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of copper and violet. "You hear about what happened in town?" he asked, joining her at the fence. "I heard. Vernon Sykes is going to be a problem." "Vernon Sykes is already a problem. He just hasn't decided what kind yet." Ethan leaned against the fence post. "You always this calm about threats?" "I learned a long time ago that panic doesn't change outcomes. Only preparation does." "And how do you prepare for a man like Vernon?" She was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "You build something too valuable to tear down," she said finally. "Something that proves you belong here, whether they like it or not." Ethan looked out across her land, at the irrigation channels that now crisscrossed the field, at the patches of green grass spreading slowly through the brown, at the barn with its new roof. "You're doing it," he said quietly. "Building something." "We're doing it," she corrected. The word hung between them. "We." Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. "Leanne," he started, then stopped, not sure how to finish. She turned to look at him, and in the fading light, her features seemed softer, more open. "What?" He wanted to tell her that he understood now, that he saw what she was fighting for and why it mattered, that somewhere along the way, her fight had become his fight too. But the words wouldn't come. So instead he said, "We should plant tomorrow. The soil's ready." She held his gaze for a moment longer, and he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. Then she nodded. All right, we'll plant tomorrow. The planting took 3 days. They worked side by side in the field, dropping seeds into the prepared earth and covering them with care. It was backbreaking work, the kind that left them both exhausted and covered in dirt by the time the sun set each evening. But there was something almost sacred about it, something that felt like hope taking physical form. On the third evening, as they finished the last row, Leanne stood and pressed her hands to the small of her back, stretching out the kinks. That's it, she said. Now we wait. And pray for rain, Ethan added. She shot him a look. You believe in prayer? Not really, but I believe in rain. Then let's hope the sky agrees with you. They walked back to the house together, their shadows stretching long across the field behind them. The air had cooled and the first stars were beginning to appear overhead. Leanne had fixed up the porch over the past few weeks, replacing the rotten boards and reinforcing the posts. It was still rough, still weathered, but it was solid now. A place to sit without fearing it would collapse. They sat together in the growing darkness, sharing a simple meal of bread and cheese and cold water. Neither spoke much. They didn't need to. After a while, Leanne broke the silence. Tell me about your ranch, she said, the one you're trying to save. Ethan stared out into the darkness. Not much to tell. It's dying. Has been for 3 years. But it wasn't always. No. Once it was good. Green grass, fat cattle, water that ran year-round. He paused, remembering. My father built it from nothing, spent his whole life making it into something worth passing down. And he passed it to you. Yeah, and I'm losing it. The words came out bitter, harder than he'd intended. Leanne was quiet for a moment. You're not losing it yet. The bank says different. The bank doesn't know what you're capable of. Ethan laughed, a short, humorless sound. And what am I capable of? She turned to look at him, her expression serious. More than you think. You're still here, aren't you? Still fighting? Fighting's easy when you don't have a choice. No, she said firmly. Fighting's hardest when you don't have a choice. That's when most people give up. She held his gaze. But you didn't. You're still here. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd been holding up for too long. I don't know how much longer I can keep it up, he admitted quietly. The ranch, the fight, all of it. Then don't do it alone. I am alone. No. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it sent a jolt through him. You're not. They sat there in the darkness, her hand on his arm, the silence stretching between them like a bridge. And for the first time in 3 years, Ethan Cole didn't feel like he was drowning. The rain came 2 weeks later. Not a gentle spring shower, but a true storm that rolled in from the west like an answer to every desperate hope they'd held. Ethan was at his own ranch when the first drops began to fall, and he rode immediately to the Mercer place, driven by an urgency he didn't fully understand. He found Leanne standing in the middle of the field, her face turned up to the sky, rain streaming down her cheeks. She was laughing. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh, a sound so pure and unguarded it made his chest ache. He dismounted and walked toward her, the rain soaking through his clothes within seconds. It's working, she called out over the sound of the storm. Look! He followed her gaze and saw the irrigation channels filling with water, the liquid flowing exactly as they'd designed it, spreading out across the field in perfect geometric patterns. The seeds they'd planted were already beginning to respond, the dry earth darkening and swelling with moisture. It's working, she said again, quieter this time, as if she couldn't quite believe it. Ethan stepped closer, close enough to see the joy on her face, the way the rain had plastered her hair to her skin. You did it, he said. We did it. And then, without thinking, without planning, Ethan reached out and pulled her into his arms. She stiffened for just a moment, surprised. Then she melted into him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face pressed against his chest. They stood there in the rain, holding each other while the storm poured down around them. And Ethan realized something that should have terrified him, but somehow didn't. He was falling in love with her, not because she needed him, but because she didn't. Not because she was helpless, but because she was strong. Not because she fit into his world, but because she was building her own. When they finally pulled apart, both soaked to the bone, Leanne looked up at him with eyes that held something he'd never seen there before. vulnerability. "Ethan?" she said softly. "Yeah? Thank you for not leaving." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing the rain from her cheeks. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. And he meant it. But the world had other plans. 3 days after the storm, a stranger arrived in Prescott. He came on the afternoon train, dressed in an expensive Eastern suit that looked absurdly out of place against the dusty platform. He carried a leather satchel and walked with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about where his next meal would come from. His name was Charles Brennan, and he worked for the financier who destroyed Leon's father. Ethan didn't know any of this yet. He only learned about the stranger's arrival when he rode into town the next day and heard people talking. A man from back east, asking questions about the Mercer place, about the Chinese woman who'd bought it, about Ethan Cole. He found Sheriff Dawes at the jailhouse, sitting at his desk with a cup of coffee. "You heard about our visitor?" Dawes asked before Ethan could speak. "I heard. Who is he?" "Says his name's Brennan. Says he's here on business." "What kind of business?" "The kind that involves lawyers and contracts and things I don't understand." Dawes took a sip of his coffee. "But I'll tell you what I do understand. He's got money, real money, and he's very interested in your friend Miss Jo." Ethan's stomach tightened. "He talked to her?" "Not yet, but he will." Dawes set down his cup. "He's staying at the hotel. Asked me all kinds of questions about the Mercer place, about water rights, about who's been helping her get it running." "And you told him?" "I told him enough to keep him from getting suspicious, not enough to help him." Dawes leaned back in his chair. "Whatever that woman's running from, Cole, I think it just caught up with her." Ethan didn't waste time responding. He turned and walked straight out of the jailhouse, mounted his horse, and rode hard toward the Mercer place. He found Leanne in the barn, organizing tools. She looked up when he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her straighten immediately. "What happened?" "There's a man in town, from back east. He's asking about you." All the color drained from her face. "His name?" she said quietly. "Did you get his name?" "Brennan. Charles Brennan." She closed her eyes, and Ethan saw her hands curl into fists at her sides. "Leanne, who is he?" When she opened her eyes again, they were hard, distant. The walls were back up, higher and thicker than before. "He's the attorney who executed the contract that took my father's business," she said flatly. "He's the man who made sure we lost everything." "Why would he come here?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to have anything. And the fact that I'm making this work," she gestured around the barn, at the ranch beyond, "it threatens everything." Ethan stepped closer. "Threatens what?" "The narrative. The story they told to justify what they did." Her voice was cold now, controlled. "My father failed because he was incompetent, because he couldn't manage his own business. That's what they said in court. That's what they'll keep saying as long as I don't prove otherwise. And this ranch proves otherwise. This ranch proves I'm capable, that my family was capable, that we were destroyed by design, not by weakness." She met his eyes. "That's why Brennan's here, to make sure I fail." Ethan felt anger rising in his chest. He can do whatever he wants. He has the law on his side. He has money. He has power. She turned away, her shoulders tight. "And I have a half-dead ranch and a pile of debt. You have more than that, do I? You have me." She turned back to him, and for a moment he saw the fear beneath the armor, the exhaustion, the weight of carrying a fight that never seemed to end. "Ethan," she said quietly, "you don't understand what you're up against, what he's capable of." "Then explain it to me." She was silent for a long moment. Then she walked to a trunk in the corner of the barn and pulled out a leather portfolio. She opened it and handed him a document. Ethan scanned the pages, struggling to make sense of the dense legal language. But certain words jumped out at him. Conditional ownership, performance clause, forfeiture. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "The contract my father signed. The one that destroyed him." She pointed to a section near the bottom. "See that clause? It says that if the business failed to meet certain revenue targets within 5 years, full ownership would transfer to the financier's holding company. And your father didn't meet the targets. Because the targets were impossible. They were designed to fail." Her voice was bitter. And this ranch, this worthless piece of land in the middle of nowhere, it's part of the contract too. Ethan's blood ran cold. How? There's a secondary clause. If I, as the surviving heir, fail to make the property profitable within 3 years of acquisition, the land reverts to the holding company. She took the document back from him. I bought this place 2 years and 8 months ago. You have 4 months. I have 4 months. Ethan felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have tried to stop me, or you would have helped out of pity, and I didn't want either. She met his eyes. I wanted to do this on my own terms. And now? Now Brennan's here, which means they're watching, which means they know I'm close to succeeding. She closed the portfolio. And they're going to do everything they can to make sure I don't. Ethan took a step toward her. Then we fight. Together. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He reached out and took her hands in his. You said I wasn't alone anymore. Well, neither are you. Whatever's coming, we face it together. For a moment, Lion just looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then slowly, she nodded. All right, she said. Together. Charles Brennan arrived at the Mercer place the next afternoon, riding in a hired buggy that looked as out of place on the rough ranch road as his suit had on the train platform. Ethan and Leon were working in the field when they saw him coming. They exchanged a glance, and then Leon set down her tools and walked toward the house, her spine straight, her expression calm. Ethan followed a few steps behind, close enough to hear but far enough to let her handle it. Brennan climbed down from the buggy, brushing dust from his sleeves with obvious distaste. He was a thin man in his 40s, with sharp features and eyes that calculated everything they saw. Miss Joe, he said, his voice smooth and cultured, what a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Leon stopped 10 feet away from him. Mr. Brennan, I must say, I'm impressed. When I heard you'd purchased this property, I assumed it was a moment of sentimentality, but you've actually managed to make something of it. He gestured around the ranch. Quite resourceful. What do you want? Brennan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Straight to business, I appreciate that. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Ashford. I believe you remember him. Leon's expression didn't change, but Ethan saw her hands curl into fists at her sides. I remember. Good. Then you'll understand why he's concerned about your recent activities here. Brennan pulled a document from his satchel. You're aware, I'm sure, of the profitability clause in your contract. I'm aware. Then you understand that the deadline is approaching. 4 months, to be precise. He held out the document. Mr. Ashford wanted me to remind you of the terms, and to offer you an alternative. Leon didn't take the paper. I don't need alternatives. I'll meet the terms. Will you? Brennan's smile widened. Because, according to our assessment, this ranch is still operating at a significant loss. Even with your impressive efforts, the likelihood of achieving profitability in 4 months seems optimistic. Your assessment is wrong. Is it? Or are you simply unwilling to face reality? He tucked the document back into his satchel. Mr. Ashford is a reasonable man, Miss Joe. He's willing to release you from the contract entirely. You sign over the property now, and you walk away with no further obligation. Clean slate. I'm not interested. Brennan's expression hardened. You should be. Because if you fail to meet the deadline, you don't just lose the ranch. You lose the right to contest the original contract. Forever. That's what you're risking here. For the first time, Ethan saw Leon's composure waver. Just for a second. Just a flicker of something that looked like fear. But then it was gone. And her voice was steady when she spoke. I'll take my chances. Brennan studied her for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted to Ethan, and something cold moved through his eyes. And who might you be? Before Ethan could answer, Leon stepped forward, putting herself between them. He's none of your concern. On the contrary, anyone helping you is very much my concern. Brennan tilted his head. I do hope you're not counting on charity to meet your obligations, Miss Joe. The contract specifies that profitability must be achieved through legitimate business operations, not gifts. Everything we're doing here is legitimate. We'll see. Brennan walked back to his buggy, then paused and turned. You have 4 months, Miss Joe. I'll be watching to make sure everything is conducted properly. I'd hate for there to be any irregularities. He climbed into the buggy and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Leanne stood motionless, staring after him. Ethan moved to her side. What did he mean by irregularities? He means he's going to look for any excuse to invalidate what we've built here. Any violation of contract terms. Any technicality. She turned to him and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. He's going to try to destroy us before we even get to the deadline. Then we don't give him anything to work with. It's not that simple. Men like Brennan don't need real reasons. They create them. Ethan took her hands in his. Leanne, look at me. She met his eyes. We're going to win this, he said firmly. Not because it's easy, not because it's fair, but because we're not going to stop fighting. Understand? For a moment, she just looked at him. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right, she whispered. We fight. The fight began the very next day. Ethan arrived at the Mercer place before dawn to find Leanne already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with the contract spread out before her and a ledger open beside it. A single oil lamp cast flickering shadows across her face. You sleep at all? He asked. Some. She didn't look up from the papers. I've been going through the numbers, trying to find a way to make them work. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. And it's close. Very close. She tapped her pencil against a column of figures. The crops are growing well. If we get another good rain in the next few weeks and harvest comes in strong, we might have enough to show profit, but it depends on too many variables. What kind of variables? Weather, market prices, transportation costs. She looked up at him, and he saw the strain in her eyes. Any one of those goes wrong, and we fall short. So we don't let them go wrong. We can't control the weather, Ethan. No, but we can control everything else. He leaned forward. What do you need to guarantee success? What's the one thing that would put you over the line? Leanne was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to the window where the first gray light of dawn was beginning to show. Livestock, she said finally. If we had cattle, even a small herd, the revenue from selling them would be enough to cover any shortfall from the crops. How many head? 20, maybe 25. Oh, Ethan did the math in his head. That's a lot of money. I know. Money I don't have. She closed the ledger. I used everything I had to buy this place and get the irrigation system built. There's nothing left. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the problem pressing down on both of them. Then Ethan stood up. I have cattle, he said. Leanne looked at him sharply. What? Not many, maybe 15 head left on my ranch, but they're yours if you need them. Ethan, no. Those are your cattle. You need them to what? Watch them die of thirst on land that won't support them? He shook his head. My ranch is gone, Leanne. I've known that for months. I've just been too stubborn to admit it. But your ranch isn't gone. Not yet. And if my cattle can help save it, then that's what they should do. I can't take them. That's everything you have left. You're not taking them. I'm giving them to you. There's a difference. She stared at him, and he saw something crack in her expression. Some wall she'd been holding up finally beginning to crumble. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this? Ethan moved around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Because somewhere along the way, your fight became my fight, and I'm not going to let you lose it alone. He met her eyes. Besides, you said it yourself. We're doing this together. For a long moment, she just looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, her breath warm against his face. Thank you, she said softly. And Ethan realized that this moment, right here, was worth more than any ranch he could ever own. They moved the cattle 2 days later, driving them across the valley in the cool hours before dawn. Ethan rode point while Leanne brought up the rear, both of them working in the practiced silence of people who'd learned to read each other's movements. The animals were thin, their ribs showing, but they were alive. And on Leanne's land, with its new grass and flowing water, they would have a chance to recover. By the time they got the herd settled in the western pasture, the sun was high, and both of them were covered in dust and sweat. Leanne stood at the fence, watching the cattle spread out across the field, and Ethan saw something he'd never seen before. She was crying, not sobbing. just silent tears running down her cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the dirt on her face. He moved to stand beside her, not speaking, just being there. "I didn't think I could do this," she said quietly. "When I came here, I thought I was strong enough to fight alone, to rebuild everything by myself." She wiped at her eyes. "But I wasn't, and if you hadn't—" Her voice broke. Ethan put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, letting herself be held. "You are strong enough," he said. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. But being strong doesn't mean being alone. It means knowing when to let people in." She turned to look up at him, her eyes red but clear. "I'm letting you in," she said. "I know. I'm scared. I know that too. What if we still fail?" Ethan thought about that for a moment. About everything they'd built together. About the irrigation channels and the growing crops and the cattle now grazing in her field. "Then we fail together," he said, "and we figure out what comes next. Together." She smiled then, small and fragile but real. "All right," she said, "together." But Charles Brennan had not been idle. Over the next 2 weeks, strange things began to happen. Small things at first. A broken fence that let 3 cattle wander off. A delivery of seed that arrived spoiled, forcing them to replant an entire section. A dispute with the water rights office over documentation that Leanne was certain she'd filed correctly. None of it was conclusive. None of it could be traced directly back to Brennan. But the pattern was clear. Someone was sabotaging them. Ethan confronted Sheriff Dawes about it one afternoon in town. "I can't prove anything," Dawes said, leaning back in his chair. "And without proof, there's nothing I can do. Could be coincidence, could be bad luck." "You know it's not." "What I know and what I can prove are 2 different things, Cole." Dawes sighed. "Look, I don't like Brennan any more than you do. Man walks around like he owns the whole town. But he's careful. He doesn't get his hands dirty. He hires people to do that for him. Then find the people he hired." "With what? You want me to arrest every drifter who's passed through Prescott in the last month?" Dawes shook his head. "I'm sorry, but unless you catch someone in the act, I've got nothing to work with." Ethan left the jailhouse frustrated and angry. He knew Dawes was right, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. When he got back to the Mercer place, he found Leanne in the barn, checking the tack for damage. She looked up when he entered, and he saw the same frustration in her eyes. "Let me guess," she said. "The sheriff can't help." "Not without proof." "Then we find proof." "How? We can't watch the whole ranch 24 hours a day." Leanne set down the bridle she'd been examining. "No, but we can make them think we're more vulnerable than we are. Draw them out." Ethan frowned. "What are you thinking?" "Brennan's looking for a way to disqualify us. Some violation of the contract terms. What if we give him what he thinks is an opportunity?" She started pacing, her mind clearly working through possibilities. "We make it look like we're cutting corners, taking shortcuts, doing something that might violate the contract. And when he takes the bait, we catch him, or his people, and we have our proof." It was risky, dangerous even. But Ethan could see the logic in it. "What kind of bait?" he asked. Leanne thought for a moment, then went to her desk and pulled out the contract. She flipped through the pages until she found what she was looking for. "Here. This clause says all livestock must be properly documented and legally acquired. No stolen or unbranded animals." She looked up at him. "What if word got out that we were buying cattle from a questionable source, someone known for dealing in stolen livestock? You want to make it look like we're breaking the law?" "I want to make it look like we're desperate enough to break the law. There's a difference." She tapped the contract. "Brennan's watching us. Probably has people reporting back to him. If he hears we're making a suspicious deal, he'll send someone to verify it, to catch us in the act. And we'll be waiting." "Exactly." Ethan studied her face, seeing the determination there, the willingness to take a risk if it meant winning. "All right," he said, "let's set the trap." They spent the next 3 days carefully spreading rumors. Ethan made sure to mention in the saloon, just loud enough to be overheard, that they were considering buying livestock from a man named Jessup, who operated out of the Northern Territories. Jessup's reputation was well known. He dealt in horses and cattle of uncertain origin, selling them cheap to desperate ranchers who didn't ask too many questions. Within 2 days, word had spread through Prescott. Within 3, Ethan spotted one of Brennan's men asking questions at the livery stable. The trap was set. On the fourth night, Ethan and Leanne prepared. They moved the existing cattle to the far pasture, well out of sight. Then they waited in the barn, watching the road. Around midnight, they heard horses. Ethan moved to the window and peered out through a gap in the boards. 3 riders were approaching, moving slowly, trying to stay quiet. "That's them," he whispered. Leanne nodded, her hand resting on the rifle they'd brought with them. Not to use, but to have. The riders dismounted about 50 yards from the barn. One of them carried a lantern. They moved toward the empty pasture where the cattle should have been. Ethan waited until they were close enough, then stepped out of the barn with his own lantern raised. "Looking for something, gentlemen?" The 3 men froze. The one in front, a thick-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, recovered first. "We heard you were making a deal tonight. Cattle from Jessup." "Did you now? And who told you that?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "Just heard talk." "Funny thing about talk," Ethan said, walking closer. "Sometimes it's designed to draw out rats." The man's hand moved toward his gun, but before he could draw, Sheriff Dawes stepped out from behind the barn, his own weapon already leveled. "I wouldn't," Dawes said calmly. The 3 men looked at each other, clearly not expecting the law to be involved. Dawes had been skeptical when Ethan and Leanne brought him their plan, but he'd agreed to help, partly because he didn't like Brennan, mostly because he was curious to see if they were right. "Now then," Dawes said, moving closer, "why don't you boys tell me who sent you out here to spy on Miss Jo's ranch?" The scarred man clamped his mouth shut. "Not talking. That's all right. I can hold you on trespassing charges while I figure it out." Dawes gestured with his gun. "Start walking toward town. Slowly." As the men trudged past, the youngest of them, barely more than a boy, looked back at Leanne with something like guilt in his eyes. "Brennan's gonna be mad," he muttered. The scarred man cuffed him on the back of the head. "Shut up, you idiot." But it was too late. The name had been spoken. Dawes smiled grimly. "Thanks for that, son. Real helpful." The next morning, Dawes brought Brennan to the jailhouse for questioning. Ethan and Leanne were there, watching from the outer office as the lawyer sat calmly in a chair, completely unfazed. "This is harassment, Sheriff," Brennan said smoothly. "You have no evidence linking me to those men. I have 3 witnesses who say otherwise. You have 3 criminals trying to avoid punishment by implicating an innocent man." Brennan straightened his cuffs. "It won't hold up, and you know it." Dawes leaned against his desk. "Maybe not in court, but it's enough to make people wonder what you're really doing here, Mr. Brennan. I'm here on legitimate business. You're here to destroy a woman's livelihood. There's nothing legitimate about that." For the first time, Brennan's composure slipped. His eyes hardened, and when he spoke, his voice was cold. "Miss Jo signed a contract. If she can't fulfill the terms, that's not my problem. It's hers. And if someone's actively sabotaging her ability to meet those terms, then she should have been more careful about who she trusted." Brennan stood. "Am I free to go, Sheriff? Or are you planning to hold me on more imaginary charges?" Dawes was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You can go, for now." Brennan walked out without another word. Ethan moved to the doorway, watching him leave. "He's not going to stop." "No," Leanne said quietly beside him. "He's not." Dawes came to stand with them. "I can keep an eye on him, make sure he knows I'm watching, but that's about all I can do legally." "It's more than nothing," Leanne said. "Thank you, Sheriff." After they left the jailhouse, Ethan and Leanne walked together through the quiet morning streets. "He's going to escalate," Leanne said. "Now that we've exposed him, he'll get desperate. Let him. We're not backing down." "Ethan," she stopped walking and turned to face him. "I need you to understand something. This man destroyed my father, took everything from us. He's dangerous in ways you can't see." "I see them fine. I just don't care." "You should care. Because if he can't break the ranch, he'll try to break us." She reached out and took his hand. "And I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." Ethan pulled her closer, right there in the middle of the street, not caring who saw. "Nothing's going to happen to me. Or to you. We're going to win this, Leanne. And then we're going to build something better than anything your father ever had. Something that's ours." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you really believe that?" "Yes." Even knowing what we're up against? Especially knowing what we're up against. She smiled then, fragile but real, and Ethan felt something shift between them. Something deeper than partnership, deeper than friendship. Something that felt terrifyingly close to forever. The escalation came 2 weeks later, exactly as Lion had predicted. Ethan was working on reinforcing the barn roof when he saw the rider approaching. Not Brennan this time, but someone else. A young man in a clean suit carrying an official-looking satchel. Leanne came out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She watched the rider approach with the same calm wariness she brought to every unexpected visitor. The young man dismounted and pulled a document from his satchel. Miss Leon Joe. Yes. I'm here on behalf of the county assessor's office. We've received a complaint about unpaid property taxes on this land. Leanne's expression didn't change, but Ethan saw her shoulders tense. I paid those taxes. I have the receipts. According to our records, the payment was never received. That's impossible. I filed them myself. The young man held out the document. This is a notice of delinquency. If the taxes aren't paid in full within 30 days, the property will be subject to seizure and auction. Ethan climbed down from the roof and moved to stand beside Leon. How much are we talking about? $1,200, plus penalties. It was a staggering amount, more than most ranchers made in a year. Leon took the document with steady hands, but Ethan saw the color drain from her face. There must be some mistake, she said. I'll go to the assessor's office and straighten this out. You're welcome to try, ma'am, but the records are clear. The young man climbed back on his horse. 30 days. He rode away, leaving Leanne standing in the yard, staring at the notice in her hands. Ethan read over her shoulder, his jaw tightening with each word. This is Brennan, he said quietly. Has to be. Of course it's Brennan, but how do we prove it? She looked up at him, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of fighting a battle that never seemed to end. He's found the perfect weapon, legal, documented, impossible to fight without money I don't have. We'll find a way. How, Ethan? We're barely scraping by as it is. Even if we sell the cattle, we won't have enough to cover this and still meet the profitability requirements. Then there is no will. Her voice cracked. This is exactly what he wanted. To back me into a corner where I have to choose between losing the ranch to taxes or losing it to the contract. Either way, I lose. Ethan took the notice from her hands and crumpled it into a ball. No, he said firmly. You don't lose. We don't lose. You keep saying that, but nothing. He tossed the paper aside and took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. I don't care how impossible this looks. I don't care how many lawyers Brennan has or how much money he can throw at this. We are not giving up. Then what do you suggest we do? Ethan was quiet for a moment, his mind racing through possibilities. Then an idea struck him. Dangerous. Unprecedented. Maybe insane, but it might be the only chance they had. We get married, he said. Leon blinked. What? We get married, right now, this week. Ethan, this isn't the time for... I'm serious. He released her face but kept hold of her hands. If we're married, your assets become our assets. The ranch becomes our ranch, and that changes everything legally. How? Property rights? Debt obligations? Contract terms. He was thinking out loud now, pieces falling into place. If you're married to someone with a legitimate claim to the land through partnership, Brennan can't just seize it for back taxes. He'd have to come after both of us, and that means proving we're both in violation, which is a lot harder. Leon stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You want to marry me to save my ranch? I want to marry you because I love you. The words came out before he could stop them, raw, true, terrifying. The ranch is just a reason that makes it make sense to everyone else. She went very still, her eyes locked on his. Say that again, she whispered. I love you, Leon. I've loved you since the day I saw you walk off that train platform like you owned the world. And if marrying you helps us fight Brennan, then great. But even if it doesn't, I still want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want to fight every battle beside you until there are no more battles left to fight. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling. You're insane, she said. Probably. This is the worst proposal anyone's ever made. I know, and it might not even work. It might not. She pulled her hands free and wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her face against his chest. "Yes," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. Ethan's heart stopped. "Yes?" She pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with tears and laughter, and something that looked a lot like hope. "Yes, I'll marry you, because I love you too, and because you're right. Together, we might actually have a chance." Ethan picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children despite everything they were facing. When he set her down, they were both breathless. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow, the day after. As soon as possible. We'll need a witness, documents. We'll figure it out." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We'll figure all of it out. Together." They rode into Prescott the next morning and went straight to Sheriff Dawes. The sheriff listened to their plan with raised eyebrows, then leaned back in his chair and whistled low. "You two don't do anything halfway, do you?" "Can you help us?" Ethan asked. "Help you get married?" "Sure. I can sign the papers as witness, but you know this is going to make Brennan furious, right? He's going to see it as exactly what it is, a legal maneuver to protect the property." "Let him see it however he wants," Leon said. "We're not doing anything illegal." "No, but he'll try to prove you are. He'll argue it's fraud, a sham marriage designed to circumvent the contract. Then we'll prove it's not a sham." Dawes looked between them, seeing something in their faces that made him smile. "You know what? I believe you will." He stood up. "All right, let's go see the county clerk and make this official." The ceremony, if it could be called that, took less than 10 minutes. They stood in the clerk's office, Ethan in his work clothes and Leon in the same blue dress she'd worn the day she arrived, and spoke the words that bound them together. Ethan slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother, saved in a box for years without purpose until now. Leon had no ring for him, but she held his hands in hers and spoke her vows with a clarity that left no room for doubt. "I promise to stand with you, to fight beside you, to trust you when trust is the hardest thing to give." She met his eyes. "And to love you, even when the world tries to tear us apart." Ethan felt something break open in his chest, some last wall finally crumbling. "I promise the same," he said quietly. "All of it. Forever." The clerk stamped the papers, Dawes signed as witness, and just like that they were married. They walked out of the building into bright afternoon sunlight, and Ethan turned to his wife, and kissed her right there on the courthouse steps. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Leon was smiling wider than he'd ever seen. "What now?" she asked. "Now we go home," Ethan said, "and we get ready for whatever comes next." Because they both knew the fight wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. Charles Brennan received the news of their marriage 3 hours after the ink dried on the papers. Ethan knew because he saw the lawyer's buggy racing toward the ranch just before sunset, dust billowing behind it like a storm cloud. He and Leon were sitting on the newly repaired porch, her hand in his, watching the cattle graze in the western pasture. "Here we go," Ethan said quietly. Leon squeezed his hand. "Let him come." Brennan didn't bother with pleasantries this time. He climbed down from the buggy with his face flushed red, his usual composure completely shattered. "This is fraud," he said, marching toward them with papers clutched in his fist. "Transparent, illegal fraud, and I will see you both prosecuted for it." Ethan stood slowly, keeping himself between Brennan and Leon. "Marriage isn't fraud, Brennan. It's legal in all 50 states and 3 territories. A marriage of convenience designed specifically to circumvent contractual obligations is absolutely fraud." Brennan thrust the papers at them. "You think this changes anything? You think some hastily arranged ceremony protects you?" Leon rose to her feet, her voice calm. "Actually, yes, it does. As Mr. Cole's wife, I now have joint ownership of all marital property. That includes this ranch, which means any action you take against it affects both of us, not just me. I will prove this marriage is a sham." "Prove whatever you like," Ethan said. "We said our vows in front of a county clerk and a sheriff. We signed legal documents. We're living together on our property. What part of that sounds like a sham to you?" Brennan's jaw worked, his eyes darting between them. Ethan could see the calculations running behind those cold eyes, searching for an angle, a weakness, some way to turn this to his advantage. "Mr. Ashford will not accept this," Brennan said finally. "Mr. Ashford doesn't have a choice," Leon replied. "The contract specified that I had to make this property profitable. It said nothing about marital status. My marriage doesn't violate a single clause." "Your marriage is a deliberate attempt to shield assets from legitimate collection." "No. My marriage is a commitment to the man I love." She moved to stand beside Ethan, her shoulder touching his. "Everything else is just a convenient benefit." Brennan stared at them, his face twisted with rage and frustration. For a moment, Ethan thought the man might actually lose control completely. Then Brennan straightened his jacket, smoothed his hair, and when he spoke again, his voice was ice cold. "Enjoy your victory, Mrs. Cole, because it won't last." He looked directly at Leon. "I'm going to tear apart every piece of your operation, every transaction, every document, every claim you've made. And when I find the irregularity, and I will find it, I'm going to use it to take everything from you, just like we took everything from your father." The words hit Leon like a physical blow. Ethan saw her flinch, saw the pain flash across her face before she could hide it. He took a step toward Brennan, his hands curling into fists. "Get off our property." "Or what? You'll strike me? Please do. It would make this so much easier." "I said get off our property." Something in Ethan's voice must have finally penetrated because Brennan took a step back, but his eyes remained hard, calculating. 4 months, he said. "That's all you have left. 4 months to meet the profitability clause, pay the tax debt, and prove this ranch is legitimate." He smiled, thin and cruel. "I'm going to enjoy watching you fail." He climbed back into his buggy and drove away. Ethan stood there, breathing hard, every muscle in his body still coiled with the urge to violence. Leon touched his arm gently. "He's not worth it." "He threatened you." "He's been threatening me since this started. It doesn't change anything." Ethan turned to her, seeing the strength in her eyes despite the pain Brennan's words had caused. "He's going to tear apart everything we've built looking for a mistake." "I know, so we make sure there are no mistakes to find." She lifted her chin. "We have 4 months. Let's use them." The next 2 months were the hardest either of them had ever endured. Brennan made good on his threat. Every week brought some new challenge, some new investigation, some new bureaucrat demanding to see their paperwork. The water rights were questioned. The cattle ownership was verified 3 separate times. The crop projections were audited by an assessor who spent 5 days measuring every inch of the fields. Through it all, Ethan and Leon worked from dawn until long after dark. They harvested the first crop and immediately planted another, racing to maximize yield before the deadline. They sold half the cattle at market, using the profit to pay down the tax debt while keeping enough breeding stock to maintain the herd. Every decision was calculated, every dollar counted, every risk weighed, and through it all, they grew closer. Living together, working together, fighting together, it forged something between them that went deeper than love, deeper than partnership. It became a kind of shared understanding that didn't require words. Ethan learned to read her silences, to know when she needed comfort and when she needed space. He learned that she was strongest in the morning, most vulnerable at night, that she hated asking for help but would accept it if offered without fanfare, that she had nightmares about her father sometimes, waking in the dark with tears on her face. Lynn learned that beneath Ethan's quiet strength was a deep well of doubt that he'd spent years trying to fill with work. That he blamed himself for losing his father's ranch, even though the drought had been beyond his control. That he was terrified of failing her the way he felt he'd failed everyone else. They learned each other's bodies too, slowly and carefully, finding comfort in the simple act of being close. Ethan would wake in the night to find her curled against him, her breathing soft and even. Leon would fall asleep with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. It wasn't the romance of storybooks. There were no grand gestures or passionate declarations, just 2 people holding each other up through the weight of an impossible fight. And somehow, it was enough. 6 weeks before the deadline, Sheriff Dawes rode out to the ranch with news. Ethan was repairing a section of fence when he saw the lawman approaching. He set down his tools and walked to meet him, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Sheriff?" "Cole." Dawes dismounted, his expression serious. We need to talk. Leanne emerged from the barn, her sleeves rolled up, dirt on her hands. She must have sensed the gravity in Dawes's tone because she walked straight to them without a word. What's wrong? She asked. Dawes pulled a folded telegram from his pocket. This came through yesterday. I thought you should see it before Brennan gets wind of it. Leanne took the telegram and read it, her face going pale. What is it? Ethan asked. She handed it to him without speaking. The telegram was from an attorney in San Francisco. It stated in cold legal language that Benjamin Ashford, the financier who destroyed Leanne's father, was personally traveling to Wyoming to oversee the resolution of the contract dispute. He would arrive in 4 weeks, 1 week before the final deadline. Ethan looked up at Dawes. Why is he coming here himself? Because Brennan's failed, Leanne said quietly. Every investigation has come up clean. Every audit has shown we're operating legitimately. Ashford's coming to finish this personally. What can he do that Brennan hasn't already tried? Anything he wants. She took the telegram back, staring at the words. Ashford doesn't lose, ever. If he's coming here, it means he's found something, some way to destroy us that Brennan couldn't execute. Or he's desperate, Dawes suggested. Maybe you've got him worried. Leanne shook her head. Men like Ashford don't get worried. They get angry. And when they get angry, they get dangerous. Ethan took her hand. Then we'll be ready for him. You don't understand. Ashford isn't just powerful. He's connected. Judges, politicians, lawmen. He owns half the legal system between here and the coast. She looked at Dawes. No offense, Sheriff. None taken. You're probably right. So what do we do? Ethan asked. Leanne was quiet for a long moment, her mind clearly working through possibilities. We go to him first, she said finally. Both men stared at her. You want to go to San Francisco? Ethan said. Why would we do that? Because if we wait for him to come here, we're fighting on his terms, in his territory. But if we go to him, if we face him in his own office before the deadline, we control the narrative. That's insane, Dawes said. You'd be walking straight into the lion's den. Maybe, but at least we'd be walking in together, on our feet, with our heads high. She looked at Ethan. We've proven we can make this ranch work. We've met every challenge Brennan threw at us. Now we prove to Ashford that we're not going to back down, no matter what he threatens. Ethan studied her face, seeing the fierce determination there, the refusal to be cornered or controlled. You really think this will work? He asked. I think it's our best chance, maybe our only chance. She squeezed his hand. Besides, I'm tired of running. I'm tired of defending. It's time to attack. Dawes shifted his weight, looking between them. If you're serious about this, you'll need help. Ashford's office is in the financial district. You can't just walk in off the street. Then how do we get in? Ethan asked. You schedule an appointment. Make it official. Come at him like you're there to negotiate, not surrender. Dawes thought for a moment. I might know someone who can help. A lawyer in Sacramento who specializes in contract disputes. He's good, expensive, but good. We don't have money for expensive lawyers, Leanne said. You might not need to pay him, not if he thinks he can embarrass Ashford in the process. Dawes smiled grimly. This lawyer, his name's Harrison Price, he and Ashford have history, bad history. If I told him you were willing to fight Ashford in court, he might take the case just for the satisfaction. Leanne and Ethan exchanged a look. Set up the meeting, Leanne said, with both of them. We'll go to San Francisco and we'll end this. One way or another. The journey east took 4 days by train. Ethan had never traveled farther than Denver, and the endless miles of changing landscape outside the window felt surreal. Mountains gave way to desert, then to grassland, then finally to the rolling hills of California. Leanne sat beside him, her hand in his, watching the world pass by. She was quiet, withdrawn into herself in a way she rarely was anymore. On the third night, as the train rattled through the darkness, she finally spoke. My father took me on a train once. When I was young, he was traveling to meet a business partner in Chicago, and he brought me along because my mother was ill. She stared out the window at her own reflection. I remember thinking the world was so big that there was room enough for everyone to find their place in it. You still believe that? Ethan asked. I don't know what I believe anymore. She turned to look at him. What if we fail? What if we go all this way and Ashford destroys us anyway? Then we'll have failed trying, fighting, together. Is that enough for you? Ethan thought about the question, really thought about it. A year ago, I would have said no. I would have said the only thing that mattered was winning, saving the ranch, proving I could do what my father did. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. But now, yeah, it's enough. Because I'd rather lose everything fighting beside you than win everything alone. Leon's eyes filled with tears. How are you so sure? Because I know what my life was before you, and I know what it is now, and there's no contest. He pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Whatever happens in San Francisco, we'll face it together. And then we'll figure out what comes next, together. She pressed her face against his chest, and he felt the dampness of her tears soaking through his shirt. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. They sat that way for a long time, holding each other as the train carried them toward an uncertain future. San Francisco was overwhelming. The city sprawled across hills like something out of a dream, buildings packed so tightly together there seemed to be no space for anything to breathe. The streets were crowded with people and carriages and noise, a constant roar of humanity that never seemed to stop. Ethan felt lost the moment they stepped off the train. But Leon moved through it all with the same calm focus she brought to everything. She'd grown up in cities like this, and despite everything she'd lost, she still knew how to navigate them. They met Harrison Price at his office on the third floor of a building that smelled like cigar smoke and old paper. Price was a man in his 50s, thin and sharp-featured, with eyes that missed nothing. He listened to their story without interrupting, his fingers steepled in front of his face. When Leon finished, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. Ashford must be losing his mind, Price said. You've done what no one else has ever managed. You've fought him to a standstill. We haven't won yet, Leon said. No. But you've survived this long. That's more than most. Price stood and walked to his window, looking out over the city. I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Cole. This case is nearly impossible to win. Ashford has the best lawyers money can buy. He has judges in his pocket. He has resources we can't begin to match. Then why did you agree to see us? Ethan asked. Price turned back to them, and his smile widened. Because 15 years ago, Benjamin Ashford destroyed a client of mine using the exact same tactics he used on your father. I've been waiting for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to challenge him publicly ever since. And you think we're that someone? Leon said. I think you're the best chance I'm going to get. Price walked back to his desk and pulled out a stack of papers. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to request a formal meeting with Ashford. We're going to bring the contract, your financial records, proof of profitability, and documentation of every instance of sabotage and harassment you've endured. And we're going to demand he release you from the contract entirely. He'll never agree to that, Leon said. Probably not. But we're not actually expecting him to agree. We're creating a record, evidence that you came to him in good faith, seeking resolution, and that he refused. When this goes to court, and it will go to court, that record will matter. Ethan frowned. Wait, you think this is going to end up in court? I think Ashford would rather burn money than admit he was wrong, so yes, this is absolutely going to court. Price looked between them. The question is whether you're willing to see it through, because once we walk into his office and make our demands, there's no going back. He'll come at you with everything he has. Leon looked at Ethan, her eyes asking the question she didn't need to speak. Are you sure? Ethan took her hand and nodded. We're sure, he said. Price's smile turned fierce. Then let's go ruin Benjamin Ashford's week. The Ashford building dominated the financial district like a monument to power. Ethan and Leon stood on the street, looking up at the 12 stories of marble and glass, and for the first time since leaving Wyoming, Ethan felt genuinely afraid. This was Ashford's kingdom, his territory. They were walking straight into the heart of the empire that had destroyed Leon's family. We can still turn back, he said quietly. Leon shook her head. No, we can't. Harrison Price joined them on the sidewalk, carrying his leather case filled with documents. Ready? As we'll ever be, Leon said. They walked through the massive doors into a lobby that looked more like a cathedral than an office building. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, Everything designed to make visitors feel small. The receptionist looked up as they approached, her expression politely dismissive until Price handed her a card. Harrison Price, attorney at law. We have an appointment with Mr. Ashford. The woman's demeanor changed immediately. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and disappeared through a side door. 5 minutes later, they were being escorted to the top floor. The elevator ride felt endless. Ethan kept his hand on the small of Leon's back, feeling the tension in her spine. Whatever happens, he whispered, I'm right here. She nodded but didn't speak. The elevator doors opened onto a hallway lined with dark wood and expensive art. They were led to a set of double doors at the end, which opened into an office so large it could have swallowed Ethan's entire ranch house. And there, behind a desk the size of a wagon bed, sat Benjamin Ashford. He was younger than Ethan expected, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of face that was handsome in a cold, precise way. He wore a suit that probably cost more than most men earned in a lifetime, and he didn't stand when they entered. Miss Joe, he said, his voice smooth. Or should I say Mrs. Cole now? Congratulations on your marriage. There was no warmth in the words, just mockery. Leon lifted her chin. Mr. Ashford, please, sit. He gestured to the chairs across from his desk. I must admit I was surprised to receive your request for a meeting. I assumed you'd simply wait for the inevitable conclusion of our contract. We're not here to wait for anything, Price said, setting his case on the desk. We're here to negotiate a settlement. Ashford's eyebrow lifted. A settlement? How generous of you to offer. We're not offering, we're demanding. You release Mrs. Cole from the contract, you forgive the tax debt, and you cease all harassment and sabotage of her property. For a moment, Ashford just stared at them. Then he laughed. It was a genuinely amused sound, like he'd just heard the best joke of his life. You come into my office, he said, still chuckling, and you demand I surrender. That's bold, Price. Stupid, but bold. It's not stupid if we can prove fraud, Leon said quietly. The laughter stopped. Ashford leaned forward, his eyes suddenly sharp. Excuse me? Leon reached into her own bag and pulled out a folder. She opened it and laid a single document on the desk. This is the original contract you presented to my father, the one he signed before your lawyers made the modifications. Ashford picked up the paper, his expression unreadable. Notice anything different? Leon asked. This proves nothing. It proves that the profitability clause, the one that destroyed my father, wasn't in the original agreement. It was added later, after he'd already signed, after he'd already committed his entire business to the partnership. Modifications to contracts happen all the time. Not without both parties consenting, not without new signatures, not without documentation. Leon pulled out another paper. This is a statement from the notary who witnessed my father's signature. He swears the contract he notarized didn't include the profitability clause, which means you added it later, which means the entire contract is fraudulent. The room went deathly quiet. Ethan watched Ashford's face, seeing the calculations running behind those cold eyes. Even if what you're saying is true, Ashford said slowly, the statute of limitations on contract fraud has long since passed. You can't challenge the original agreement now. No, Price said. But we can challenge the extension, the one that transferred the Wyoming property to Mrs. Cole with the same profitability clause. That contract is less than 3 years old, well within the statute of limitations. Ashford set down the papers and leaned back in his chair, his expression still calm, too calm. You've done your homework. I'm impressed. He folded his hands in front of him. But you're missing one critical detail. What's that? Leon asked. Even if you can prove fraud, and that's a very large if, you still can't afford the legal battle. I have a dozen attorneys on retainer. I can drag this out for years, decades if I want to. You'll be bankrupt long before we ever see the inside of a courtroom. Maybe, Price said, but the moment we file, it becomes public record. Every newspaper in the state will be asking questions about how Benjamin Ashford built his empire, about how many other contracts might have been modified after the fact, about how many other families you've destroyed using the same methods. For the first time, something flickered in Ashford's eyes. Not fear, but concern. You're threatening me with bad publicity? I'm promising you a scandal, Price corrected, one that will follow you for the rest of your life. Is that really worth holding on to one worthless ranch in Wyoming? The silence stretched out, thick and heavy. Then Ashford smiled. It was a terrible smile, cold and empty and utterly without mercy. "You want to know what that ranch is worth to me?" he said quietly. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But what's worth everything is making sure people like you understand that I don't lose. Ever. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the land. I care about the principle." He stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. "Your father thought he could outmaneuver me, Miss Joe. He thought he was clever enough to catch the trap before it closed. He was wrong. And now you're making the same mistake." Leanne stood as well, her voice steady. "My father was destroyed because he trusted you, because he believed in good faith and fair dealing. I don't have that weakness. I know exactly what you are. And what am I? A bully, a thief, a man who built his fortune on other people's broken dreams." She took a step closer to the desk. "But you made one mistake with me that you didn't make with my father. And what's that? You gave me time. Time to build something. Time to prove I could survive your worst. Time to find someone who believed in me enough to stand beside me no matter what you threw at us." She reached back and took Ethan's hand. "You thought isolation was a weapon, but all you did was show me what real partnership looks like." Ashford turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "How touching. But partnership doesn't change contracts. Partnership doesn't erase debt. And partnership certainly doesn't make you capable of meeting the profitability requirements in—" He glanced at a calendar on his desk. 5 weeks. "We'll meet them," Ethan said, speaking for the first time. "We've met every other challenge you've thrown at us. We'll meet this one too. Will you? Even knowing I'll be watching every transaction, auditing every sale, looking for any excuse to disqualify your claims?" Even knowing that, Ashford studied them both for a long moment. Then he walked back to his desk and sat down. "Get out of my office," he said quietly. "Mr. Ashford," Price started. "I said get out, all of you." His voice was flat, emotionless. "You want to fight me? Fine. I'll see you in court. But understand this. I will destroy you. Not just financially, not just legally. I will erase any trace that you ever existed. Your ranch will be dust. Your names will be forgotten. And when it's over, I'll make sure everyone knows what happens to people who challenge Benjamin Ashford." Leon held his gaze, unflinching. "We'll see." They turned and walked out of the office, down the hall, into the elevator. No one spoke until they were back on the street, breathing in the cool evening air. Price was the first to break the silence. "Well," he said, "that went about as badly as it possibly could have." Ethan looked at Leon, expecting to see fear or defeat. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like satisfaction. "No," she said quietly. "That went exactly as it needed to." "How do you figure?" Price asked. "Because now we know the truth. Ashford isn't going to let this go. He's not going to negotiate. He's not interested in reason or compromise." She looked at Ethan. "Which means we stop trying to convince him. We stop defending. And we do what we should have done from the beginning." "What's that?" Ethan asked. Leon smiled, fierce and bright. "We win." They returned to Wyoming with 5 weeks left and a plan that terrified Ethan almost as much as it inspired him. On the train ride back, Leon laid out her strategy with the same precision she'd used to design the irrigation system. Harrison Price listened, occasionally nodding, sometimes interjecting with legal considerations. But mostly, he just watched her with something that looked like admiration. "You understand this is incredibly risky," Price said when she finished. "If even one piece fails, you lose everything." "We're going to lose everything anyway if we don't try," Leanne replied. "At least this way we control how it happens." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Tell me again why this works." "Because Ashford is expecting us to barely scrape by. To meet the profitability requirement by the thinnest possible margin, giving him room to challenge our numbers, dispute our accounting, find technicalities." She looked out the window at the passing landscape. "But if we exceed the requirement by such a significant amount that there's no room for dispute, no angle for him to attack, then he has nothing. The contract is fulfilled. We're free." "And how exactly do we exceed it by that much in 5 weeks?" Ethan asked. "We don't just meet the market, we create one." That was the part that scared him. But as she explained the details, The pieces began to fall into place in his mind. It was audacious, maybe impossible, but then again, so was everything else they'd done. The moment they arrived back at the ranch, Lion hit the ground running. She'd spent the train ride writing letters, and now she sent them out to every contact she still had from her father's business. Merchants in Denver and Salt Lake City, buyers in California, trading companies that had once partnered with her family before Ashford destroyed them. The message was simple: high-quality beef and grain, available in bulk at competitive prices. Delivery guaranteed within 6 weeks. Most didn't respond. The Joe name still carried too much taint from the scandal. But some did. Enough to matter. Within a week, Leanne had secured contracts for twice as much product as the ranch was currently capable of producing. "How are we going to deliver this?" Ethan asked, staring at the orders spread across the kitchen table. "We're not. Not alone." Leanne was already pulling on her coat. "Come on, we have people to talk to." She led him into Prescott, straight to the feed store where Vernon Sykes and a handful of other ranchers were gathered, complaining about low cattle prices and the difficulty of getting product to market. Leanne walked in like she owned the place. "Gentlemen," she said, "I have a business proposition." Vernon looked up, his expression immediately souring. "We don't do business with someone who has guaranteed buyers willing to pay 20% above current market rates," Leanne interrupted. "Because that seems like poor financial planning, Mr. Sykes." That got their attention. She laid out the offer with the same clarity she brought to everything. She had contracts for beef and grain that she couldn't fulfill alone. If the other ranchers were willing to pool their resources, combine their herds and crops with hers, she could get all of them access to buyers who would pay premium prices. "Why would you share that?" one of the ranchers asked suspiciously. "You could keep those buyers for yourself." "Because I need volume I don't have," Leon said simply. "And you need buyers you can't reach. Separately, we both struggle. Together, we all profit." Vernon crossed his arms. "And what's your cut?" 10% coordination fee, plus priority fulfillment for my own product to meet contractual obligations." "That's robbery. That's business. You can take it or keep selling locally for 30% less than what I'm offering." She pulled out the contracts and set them on the counter. "You have 24 hours to decide. After that, I find other partners." She walked out without waiting for an answer. Ethan followed her into the street, shaking his head in amazement. "You know they hate you, right?" "I know they hate losing money more." She glanced back at the feed store. "They'll agree. Maybe not Vernon, he's too proud, but the others will. They can't afford not to." She was right. By the next evening, 4 ranchers had signed on. 2 days later, 3 more joined. Even Vernon, after sulking for another day, finally agreed to participate. Suddenly, the impossible volume didn't seem quite so impossible. The next 3 weeks were chaos. Leanne coordinated the collection and consolidation of livestock and crops from 7 different ranches, organizing transportation, managing quality control, negotiating final prices with buyers who tried to lowball at the last minute. She worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and sheer determination. Ethan managed the physical logistics, building temporary pens for the combined herds, organizing the harvest crews, ensuring everything stayed on schedule. His own ranch, now formally abandoned to the bank, became a staging area for the operation. It hurt, watching other people's cattle graze on land his father had built. But there was also something liberating about it, like finally letting go of weight he'd been carrying for too long. Sheriff Dawes helped where he could, keeping an eye out for any more sabotage attempts. There were a few: a broken wagon wheel that seemed too convenient, a fence that mysteriously opened in the night, but nothing they couldn't handle. Charles Brennan watched it all from town, his expression growing darker each day. Twice he tried to intervene, claiming various regulatory violations. Twice Dawes sent him away with polite but firm reminders that everything being done was legal. The third time Brennan showed up, Leanne was ready for him. "Mr. Brennan," she said, not looking up from the ledger where she was recording shipment weights. "Unless you have a court order, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We're busy." "This entire operation is a fraud," Brennan said, his voice tight. "You're using other people's livestock to meet your contractual obligations. That violates the terms." "Actually, it doesn't." Leanne finally looked up. "The contract specifies that the ranch must be profitable. It says nothing about the source of that profit. I'm running a legitimate brokerage operation, coordinating sales for multiple ranches. The fact that my ranch benefits from that coordination is incidental. Incidental, Brennan repeated flatly. Would you like me to use smaller words? Ethan had to turn away to hide his smile. Brennan's face flushed red. Mr. Ashford will hear about this. I'm sure he will. Please give him my regards. Brennan stormed off, and Leanne went back to her ledger like nothing had happened. But that night, alone in their room, Ethan saw the exhaustion in her eyes. You're wearing yourself out, he said gently, helping her out of her boots. I'm fine. Leanne, she sighed, leaning back against the headboard. 3 more weeks, that's all. 3 more weeks and this is over. And then what? Then we find out if we won. She looked at him, and for the first time in days, he saw fear in her eyes. What if it's not enough, Ethan? What if we do everything right and Ashford still finds a way? He climbed into bed beside her, pulling her into his arms. Then we'll deal with it, together, like everything else. I'm so tired of fighting. I know. Me too. He kissed the top of her head. But you're almost there. We're almost there. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly he almost didn't hear it, she said, I don't know what I would have done without you. You would have found a way. You always do. No, I wouldn't have. She pulled back to look at him. Before you, I was just surviving, just going through the motions because I didn't know what else to do. But you showed me something different. What's that? That fighting doesn't have to mean being alone. That strength doesn't mean never needing anyone. She touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. You showed me that I could trust someone, really trust them, and that changed everything. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, some last piece of armor finally falling away. You changed everything for me too, he said. I was drowning when I met you, so focused on what I'd lost that I couldn't see what I still had, what I could still build. He covered her hand with his. You taught me that starting over isn't the same as giving up, and that sometimes the things worth fighting for aren't the things you planned on fighting for at all. They kissed then, soft and slow, and for a little while the weight of the world fell away. 2 weeks before the deadline, the first major shipment went out. 40 head of cattle, loaded onto rail cars and bound for Denver. The sale would bring in more money than Ethan had seen in 3 years of ranching. Leanne stood on the platform, watching the train pull away, and Ethan saw her shoulders finally relax. That's half of what we need, she said. The grain shipment goes out next week. If that goes through, we're... She stopped, her eyes fixed on something behind him. Ethan turned and felt his stomach drop. Benjamin Ashford was standing on the platform 20 feet away, watching them. He wasn't alone. Charles Brennan stood beside him, along with 2 other men in expensive suits who had the look of lawyers. Ashford walked toward them with the same cold confidence he'd had in San Francisco. Mrs. Cole, Mr. Cole, he nodded to each of them. Impressive operation you're running here. I'm almost sad to shut it down. You can't shut it down, Leanne said, her voice steady despite the fear Ethan could feel radiating from her. Everything we're doing is legal. Legal, yes, but not compliant. Ashford gestured to one of the lawyers, who stepped forward with a document. This is a copy of the original contract your father signed, the one that transferred this property to you. According to Clause 17, subsection B, all business operations conducted on the property must be directly related to agricultural production. They are, Leanne said. We're selling agricultural products. You're brokering sales for other ranches. That's a service business, not agricultural production, which means all revenue generated from those sales doesn't count toward your profitability requirement. The world seemed to tilt beneath Ethan's feet. Leanne went pale. That's not, you can't, I can, and I am. Ashford's smile was cold. The only revenue that counts is what your ranch produces directly, which, according to my calculations, is nowhere near enough to meet the threshold. He glanced at his pocket watch. You have 13 days to produce approximately $15,000 in profit from your ranch alone. I think we both know that's impossible. Ethan stepped forward, his hands curling into fists. You've been planning this the whole time, letting us build this operation just so you could pull the rug out. I've been enforcing a contract. Nothing more, nothing less. Ashford looked at Leon. I told you what would happen if you challenged me. I told you I would destroy you. Did you really think I was bluffing? For a long moment, Leon just stood there, staring at him. Then she did something Ethan didn't expect. She smiled. No, she said quietly. I didn't think you were bluffing. I counted on it. Ashford's expression flickered, just for a second. Excuse me? Leon reached into her bag and pulled out a different document. This is a revised operating agreement for the ranch, filed with the county 3 weeks ago, before any of the brokerage operations began. It clearly delineates which business activities fall under agricultural production and which fall under ancillary services. She handed it to him. You'll notice that all brokerage fees are classified as service revenue, which we never claim toward the profitability requirement. The only revenue we're counting is from the direct sale of livestock and crops produced on our property. Ashford read the document, his jaw tightening with each line. Furthermore, Leon continued, you'll see that we anticipated this exact challenge, which is why we've been maintaining separate accounting for the 2 revenue streams. The brokerage operation has been profitable, yes, but so has the ranch itself, independently. She pulled out a ledger and opened it, showing pages of meticulous records. Here's the breakdown. Cattle sales from our herd, $8,200. Crop sales from our fields, $6,900. Sale of water rights to neighboring ranches for irrigation, $1,400. She looked up at him. Total profit, after expenses, $16,500. Well above the $15,000 threshold. The platform went absolutely silent. Brennan grabbed the ledger, flipping through it frantically. These numbers can't be... They're accurate, Leon said calmly, and verified by an independent auditor whose report was filed with the county assessor's office last week. You're welcome to check. Ashford stared at her, and for the first time since Ethan had met him, the man looked genuinely shaken. You planned this, he said slowly. The entire brokerage operation. It wasn't about the money. It was about making me think I had you cornered. It was about both, Leon corrected. The money was necessary, but knowing you'd try to use the contract against me? That was certain. So I made sure there was no angle you could exploit. She took a step closer. You taught me that, actually. You and Brennan. Every challenge, every audit, every technicality you threw at us showed me exactly how you think, how you operate, what weaknesses you look for. So you eliminated those weaknesses, Ashford said. Every single one. She held his gaze. The contract is fulfilled. The ranch is profitable. The debt is paid. You have no legal grounds to challenge any of it. Then I'll find different grounds. No, you won't. Harrison Price's voice cut across the platform as the lawyer stepped out from behind a support column. He'd been waiting there the whole time. Because if you try, I'm filing a lawsuit for fraudulent contract modification, harassment, and attempted theft. And unlike Mrs. Cole's father, she has documentation for everything. Every sabotage attempt, every questionable audit, every threat Charles Brennan made on your behalf. Price pulled out his own briefcase and set it on a nearby bench. I have witness statements, physical evidence, telegrams with your name on them. It's all here. And it's all going to the newspapers the moment you make one more move against my clients. Ashford's face had gone white. You want a legal battle? Price continued. Fine. I'll give you one that destroys your reputation and costs you millions in settlements. Or you can walk away, sign the release papers I've prepared, and we all move on with our lives. For what felt like an eternity, no one spoke. Then Ashford turned to his lawyers. Give me the room. The men stepped away, out of earshot. Ashford looked at Lyanne, and Ethan saw something complicated in those cold eyes. Not quite respect, not quite fear, something between the two. Your father was a good man, Ashford said quietly. Weak, but good. I almost felt bad about destroying him. Don't you dare speak about my father, Leon said, her voice hard as steel. But you. Ashford shook his head slightly. You're not weak at all, are you? You're exactly like me. I'm nothing like you. Aren't you? You manipulated this entire situation to your advantage. You used people, resources, relationships, all to achieve your goal. That's not goodness, Mrs. Cole. That's ruthlessness. There's a difference, Leon said. I built something. I created value. I helped people while helping myself. You just destroy. You take without creating. You break without building. That's not strength. That's just cruelty." Ashford was quiet for a moment. Then he gestured to Brennan. "Give them the papers." "Sir, I said give them the papers." Brennan pulled out a document from his own case, his hand shaking with rage. "This is a full release from all contractual obligations. Sign it and the property is yours, free and clear." Price took the document, read it carefully, and nodded. "It's legitimate." He handed it to Leanne. She stared at it for a long moment, this piece of paper that represented the end of years of fighting. Then she signed it. Ethan signed as her husband, his hand steady despite the emotion churning in his chest. Price signed as witness. And just like that, it was over. Ashford took the signed document, folded it, and slipped it into his coat pocket. "Enjoy your victory, Mrs. Cole," he said. "You've earned it." He started to walk away, then paused and looked back. "But understand something. This doesn't change what I am, what I'm capable of. You won this time because I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again." "You won't get another chance," Leanne said. "I'm done with you, done with your world, done with everything you represent." Ashford smiled, cold and empty. "We'll see." Then he and his entourage walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Ethan, Leanne, and Price stood on the platform, surrounded by the noise of the station, and for a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Leanne's knees buckled. Ethan caught her, holding her up as years of tension finally released. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." "It's over," he confirmed, his own voice thick with emotion. "You did it! We did it!" She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and laughed. It was a sound of pure, unburdened joy. Price cleared his throat. "I'll give you two a moment, but when you're ready, we should celebrate. You just accomplished something I've been trying to do for 15 years. He walked away, leaving them alone. Ethan held Leanne while she cried, while she laughed, while she trembled with the release of carrying a weight too heavy for anyone to bear alone. "What now?" she asked finally, when she could speak again. Ethan looked out across the platform, toward the horizon where their ranch waited. "Now we go home," he said, "and we build the life we want. Not the one someone else forced on us. Not the one we had to fight for. Just ours." Leanne smiled through her tears. "I like the sound of that." Spring came to Wyoming with a gentleness that felt earned. The winter had been mild, and the early thaw brought rain that filled the irrigation channels and turned the valley green. Wildflowers bloomed across the hills, splashes of yellow and purple against the grass. The ranch thrived. With the contract fulfilled and the debt cleared, Ethan and Leanne had been free to expand. They'd bought back Ethan's old property from the bank at a fraction of what it had been worth, combining it with Leanne's ranch into a single operation that stretched across the valley. The brokerage business continued, now formalized into a proper cooperative with the other ranchers. It brought steady income and goodwill, transforming Leanne from an outsider into an essential part of the community. People still stared sometimes, still whispered, but now it was with respect instead of suspicion. Vernon Sykes even tipped his hat to her in town one day, which might have been the closest thing to an apology she'd ever get from him. The house had been expanded and repaired, no longer the half-collapsed structure Leanne had bought. It had a real porch now, with chairs where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over land that was truly theirs. On a warm afternoon in May, Ethan found Leanne in the eastern field, standing in the same spot where he'd first offered to help her almost 2 years ago. She was holding something in her hands, turning it over slowly. "What's that?" he asked, walking up beside her. She showed him. It was a letter, worn at the edges, the ink faded. "My father wrote this the week before he died," she said quietly. "I found it in his papers after the funeral. He never sent it." "What does it say?" She was quiet for a moment, then began to read. "My dearest Leanne, if you're reading this, it means I failed. Failed to protect our family. Failed to see the trap before it closed. Failed to be the father you deserved. I'm sorry. Sorrier than words can express. But I need you to know something. The business, the empire, the success we built. None of that was what mattered. What mattered was you, your strength, your intelligence, your refusal to bend even when the world demanded it. You were always better than me, stronger than me, and whatever happens, whatever I've lost, I know you'll find a way. You'll build something new, something that's yours alone. And when you do, you'll understand that failure isn't the end. It's just the beginning of something different, something better. I love you, always, your father. Her voice broke on the last word. Ethan pulled her close, and she leaned against him, the letter still clutched in her hand. He was right, she said after a while, about all of it. I did find a way. I did build something new. You did more than that, Ethan said. You proved that what Ashford destroyed wasn't weak. It was just unprepared. But you were ready. You saw him coming, and you beat him at his own game. We beat him, she corrected. I couldn't have done it without you. Yeah, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. She turned to look at him, her eyes bright. Do you ever regret it? Giving up everything to help me? I didn't give up everything. I gave up land that was already dying, a ranch I couldn't save, a fight I was losing. He cupped her face in his hands. What I got in return was you, a partner, a purpose, a future. He smiled. That's not a sacrifice. That's a gift. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. Come on, she said, taking his hand. There's something I want to show you. She led him to the barn, where a team of workers was installing equipment. What's all this? Ethan asked. A grain mill. I bought it from a manufacturer in Chicago. With the amount of wheat we're growing now, it makes more sense to process it ourselves rather than shipping it raw. She gestured to the plans spread across a workbench. We'll be able to sell flour directly to bakeries, cut out the middlemen, increase profit margins. Ethan shook his head in amazement. You're never going to stop, are you? Never going to just be satisfied with what we have. Would you want me to? No? Never. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Keep building. Keep growing. I'll be right here beside you. She leaned back against him, and they stood there together, watching the workers transform another piece of their shared vision into reality. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. The valley stretched out before them, peaceful and green. Cattle grazed in the distance. The irrigation channels sparkled with reflected light. Smoke rose from chimneys in town, carrying the smell of cooking fires and life continuing in all its ordinary beauty. Do you think Ashford will really leave us alone? Leanne asked. I think he's smart enough to know when he's lost, Ethan said. And even if he's not, we'll handle it. Same as we've handled everything else. Together. Together. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of evening settling over the land. Birds calling, horses whickering in the barn, the wind rustling through new grass. I've been thinking, Leanne said after a while, about what comes next. Oh? The cooperative is working well. The ranchers trust me now, and there's room to expand it. Not just cattle and grain, but wool, leather, timber, anything they produce that could benefit from coordinated marketing. You want to build a trading network. Something like that, but different from what my father had. Not about empire building, about community, about making sure everyone benefits, not just the people at the top. She looked at him. What do you think? Ethan thought about it. About the woman who'd arrived alone on a train platform, carrying nothing but a small case and a determination that wouldn't break. About how she'd taken worthless land and turned it into something that mattered. About how she'd faced down a man who'd destroyed her family and come out standing. I think you can do anything you set your mind to, he said. And I think I'd be honored to help you do it. She smiled, that same fierce, bright smile that had first made him realize he was falling in love with her. Good, because I'm going to need you. She took his hand, threading her fingers through his. For all of it, the building and the fighting and everything in between. You've got me, he said, for as long as you want me. That's the problem. She turned to face him fully. I want you forever. Ethan felt his breath catch. Is that so? It is. And I was thinking, she paused, suddenly looking vulnerable in a way she rarely did. I was thinking maybe it's time we made this ranch feel more like a home. A family home. The implication hit him with the force of a physical blow. Leanne, are you saying, I'm saying I want to build a life with you that's about more than just surviving, more than just fighting. I want mornings and evenings and all the ordinary moments in between. I want children who grow up knowing that land isn't just something you own, it's something you care for, something you pass on. She squeezed his hand. I want everything. With you. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight he could feel her heartbeat against his chest. Yes, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes to all of it. Every single piece. They held each other as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear overhead. And later, much later, when they finally went inside, Ethan looked back at the valley one last time. The land his father had built. The land he'd nearly lost. The land that had brought him a woman who'd taught him what it meant to truly fight for something. It wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a home, a future, a promise. And it was theirs. 5 years later, on a warm spring morning, Ethan stood in the same eastern field where everything had begun. But he wasn't alone. A small girl with dark hair and her mother's sharp eyes was holding his hand, asking questions faster than he could answer them. Why does the water go that way, Papa? Because that's how we designed it, sweetheart. See those channels? Your mama figured out exactly how to make the water flow where we need it. Mama's smart. Smartest person I know. Smarter than you? Much smarter than me. The girl giggled, then ran off to chase a butterfly. Leon walked up beside him, their second child, a son barely a year old, sleeping against her shoulder. She's going to be a handful, Leon said, watching their daughter dart through the grass. She's already a handful, takes after her mother. I was never that energetic. You were exactly that energetic. You just channeled it differently. He put his arm around her. Look at this place. Look at what you built. She did, her gaze sweeping across the valley that had transformed in the years since they'd won their freedom from Ashford. The cooperative had grown to include 15 ranches now. The grain mill was operating at full capacity. They'd just broken ground on a new schoolhouse in town, funded partly by the profits from the trading network Leanne had created, and the land itself was thriving, green and productive and beautiful. We built it, she corrected, all of it. Together. Their daughter came running back, her hands cupped carefully around something. Look, I found it! She opened her hands to reveal a small flower, blue and delicate. It's beautiful, Leon said, kneeling down. Just like you. The girl beamed, then turned to Ethan. Can we plant some at the house, so we can see them every day? Absolutely, we'll plant a whole garden. With Mama's help? With Mama's help. Their daughter grabbed both their hands, pulling them toward the house. Come on, let's start now. Ethan and Leon exchanged a glance over her head, both smiling. Coming, Leon called. As they walked together across the field, Ethan felt a sense of completeness he'd never known before. Not the completion of a journey, but the beginning of something that would continue long after they were gone. Legacy, family, love. The things that mattered more than any contract or empire or fight. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Ethan and Leon sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the valley. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd lost? Leon asked. Sometimes, but not often. Why not? Because we didn't lose. We won. And that's the story that matters. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I used to think winning meant getting back what was taken, restoring what was destroyed. But that's not what this was about, was it? No. It was about building something new, something better, something ours. Something ours, he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their land settling into evening. A place that had once been broken was now whole. A woman who'd once been alone had found partnership. A man who'd once been drowning had found purpose. And together, they'd created something that would outlast them both. I love you, Leon said quietly. I love you too. The stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Not perfect, not without challenges yet to come, but theirs. Built by their hands, protected by their partnership, sustained by their love. The ranch that had started as a trap, a weapon meant to destroy, had become instead a foundation for something beautiful. A home, a family, a future. And as Ethan looked out across the land they'd fought so hard to keep, he knew with absolute certainty that every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt had been worth it. Because this life, this woman, this place, was everything he'd never known he needed, everything he'd fight to protect for the rest of his days, everything that mattered, and it was finally, truly, completely theirs.